Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. UMNO Vice President and MP of Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob will be sworn in as the country's 9th Prime Minister at 2 p.m. tomorrow. The focus now turns to the formation of the cabinet. Now, Muhyiddin Yassin's administration had 36 ministers and minister-level advisors and envoys, and 37 deputy ministers. That was a total of 73 positions. 55 of the 115 MPs that supported the Perikatan National Government had an executive job. So what will Ismail Sabri's government look like? Well, will we see a shake-up or a downsizing of cabinet? Or will we possibly see more posts awarded in the name of coalition stability? Let's ask Dr. James Chin. He's a professor of Asian Studies at the Asia Institute of University of Tasmania in Australia. James, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. I know it's very late where you are, but let's begin our conversation looking at most recent news. Ismail Sabri as 9th Prime Minister. James, when did it become clear to you that Ismail Sabri had won this race? At any point in the week, did you think there could have been any other conclusion?
Right, I think for me personally, I think it was quite clear around Tuesdays and Wednesdays when it was quite clear that when Shafik Apdal approached the Sharaad leadership for support, when they said no to Shafik Apdal, it was quite clear that they were throwing the support behind the UMNO candidate. So it wasn't really a two-horse race, as many people said. But I think the outcome was still shocking for many people for the very simple reason that if you were to ask Malaysians or anybody keeping an eye on Malaysian politics 2.5 years ago, very few people would have named Ismail Sabri as a prime minister material. So the fact that this guy has come out of nowhere within a short space of 2 years has become a prime minister of Malaysia is really quite remarkable.
But James, he was the deputy prime minister in the Muhyiddin Yassin administration, and perhaps, and if you could respond to this, was he a bridge between the two factions that had kind of developed over the 17 months that Muhyiddin Yassin was in charge?
He wasn't so much acting as a bridge in UMNO. In fact, he was basically supported by Muhyiddin, who tried to split UMNO up. So he was the faction in UMNO that kept trying to make sure that UMNO did not pull out of the Perikatan government. So to claim that he was a bridge is absolutely wrong. I think it was quite clear that it wasn't only him, but the whole group of the UMNO MPs who were serving in the government. They wanted to keep the government intact. But Najib and Zahid had other plans, and they were quite, quite good in planning for the destruction of the Perikatan government. But really, the trigger point was on July the 29th, when the King issued a statement talking about the Attorney General and the Law Minister not doing what was agreed upon. I think that was the tipping point. After that, nothing could have saved the Muhyiddin government.
Can I ask you, moving forward, all focus will be on positions being filled in the cabinet, and Ismail Sabri will have the task of balancing what is widely seen to be public distaste for a bloated cabinet, along with the need for him to reward support and to shore up coalition stability. I'm just wondering, James, how you think he's going to make that balance? Which side of that equation do you think he will side to?
So I don't think we can expect major changes to the cabinet in terms of numbers. My take is that a lot of deals were done to ensure that he gets 114 and that he has to keep his part of the deal or reward the people who support him. So in terms of numbers in cabinet, I expect to be roughly the same, around 30 to 35, and 1 or 2 special envoys. And also people who are outside will be given some sort of government-linked posts to keep them happy. So really, it will probably be, I wouldn't use the word bloated, but it is the reality of trying to put together a very difficult coalition in order to form a new government. Now, having said that, I also expect him to leave a couple of vacancies because obviously with such a slim majority, he wants to keep a couple of empty positions so he can bring more people over to his government.
James, on Twitter, and you were very kind to put all your first responses on Twitter. You said that this is an UMNO BN back in power 2.0 rather than PN 2.0. Do you think there's going to be a rebranding exercise? And why do you think it's BN 2.0 rather than PN 2.0?
Right. So I mentioned earlier about the LDP analogy. So if you remember your history, so UMNO and Liberal Democratic Party in Japan are very similar. In political science, they're seen as a dominant party. In other words, although there are lots of parties in the system, they managed to win most elections. So if you see the LDP, the first time they were defeated was around in the early 1990s. They were out of power, if I'm not mistaken, for slightly about 2 years plus, just after 2 years. Very similar to UMNO. So UMNO was out of power for just 2 years plus before they came back into power. So the analogy is really similar. And my point is that if you look at the history of UMNO, it's very clear that every time they are in the driver's seat, basically it's UMNO government. They will not allow anybody else to take over. So the other prediction I'll make is that I think Bersatu is in big trouble now. They no longer control the office of the Prime Minister. So I suspect once the government is stabilized, UMNO will spend a bit of energy and resources trying to either absorb Bersatu or destroy at the next general election.
And when do you think that might be, James? I mean, how soon do you think there will be an election?
Well, it depends on the majority during the confidence vote. So if he doesn't get a big majority and the government is unstable, I suspect the opposition will still give him a bit of honeymoon. So basically, we're talking about a confidence vote in September, and the following month, it will be the budget process. Towards the end, nobody wants to do anything in December. January is out because it's Chinese New Year. So he will have quite a number of months, so-called the honeymoon months, where nobody will really disturb him. I suspect increasingly as we head towards the COVID thing, that there's a consensus building among the political elites that the political system cannot go back to a normal situation unless you get a clear result from the rakyat. And the only way you can get a clear result is that you go for a general election. Don't forget, if you look at the Malay ground in the last election, right, it was quite interesting. The vote was basically split three ways. So they really have to go back to the ground to get a clear result, who speaks for the Malay community. And the only way to do it is to hold a GE. So I suspect they will have a GE sometime next year, probably the second half of next year.
James, you also noted that you think that GPS, Gabungan Parti Sarawak, are a big winner in this scenario. Could you kind of elaborate on that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, so at the start of the week, after the resignation, especially the desperate speech given on Friday where he tried to reach out to the opposition, once the opposition rejected the so-called peace deal given by Muhyiddin, both sides were scrambling. Everybody understood that one of the big prize was the 18 MPs, the GPS bloc. When it was clear early in the week, by Monday or Tuesday, that GPS wasn't going to go with Anwar or Shafi, UMNO knew that they had to negotiate a special deal for GPS to come in. So I think GPS will do very well out of this process. Right now, they have, the number of ministers in the old government was really, a lot more compared to all the other small parties. So I expect them to at least retain the same level of representation. And there's also thought that they may even get the deputy prime ministership.
James, was this, I want to talk about the opposition. I'm just wondering whether the past few weeks we've seen, is this purely an internal, was this an UMNO takeover of the Perikatan National Government and the opposition is really looking at this from the outside, or were there things that the opposition could have done? And I'm just wondering where the opposition could go from here.
If you look at the structure of Malaysian politics, I think on the one hand, at the start of the process, it was clear Anwar Ibrahim had the bigger numbers. The problem is that nobody on the government side, at least on the Barisan side and on the Perikatan side, nobody wanted to talk about the DAP. So the only way for Anwar to move over and create a new government was to abandon the DAP. And again, from his perspective, I think that was not doable. So as long as the DAP card is not part of the mix, I think it would have been very difficult either way. But as I mentioned earlier, the moment GPS signaled that it wasn't going to go with the opposition side, I think at that point people understood that that UMNO had a simple majority, and that's exactly what we got today.
James, what do you or how do you rate the role of the palace in this saga, this 5-day saga, noting that, as you said, that the displeasure of His Majesty expressed a month ago was kind of a red line that the Perikatan National, or at least Muhyiddin, had crossed. How do you think, they played their cards in this particular saga?
I think if you were to look at their actions carefully, I think they were very mindful of the trust placed in them by the Constitution. But I think they were also very, very careful. You have to remember last year in February when the King picked Muhyiddin to be the Prime Minister, there was a very strong blowback, especially from the Malay community, because there was one other person who claimed to actually have a bigger number of MPs supporting him, and that the King refused to see him. So this time, I think they were being very, very careful. So, for example, we know that, after the SDs were submitted, the palace double-checked that the SDs were actually done freely. It was done correctly. So I think the palace was very, very careful to make sure that this time everything was above board. I think the process itself was very similar to last year. Party consultation with the leaders and MPs took place. Statutory declarations were signed. Then the conference of rulers, where all the Malay rulers got together to discuss, the findings of the SD and other discussion. And from there, they decided that, Ismail Sabri was the best candidate. So basically, the formula or the protocol they used was fairly similar to 2020. And in some ways, I think they also didn't have a choice. Because at the end of the day, they are a constitutional monarchy, and the only reason that they had to step in this time was because the politicians lost their plot. If the politicians had not lost their plot, we would not have seen the King taking such an active interest.
Thank you so much, James. That was political analyst James Chin. We're going to take a quick break, but after this, we'll speak to human rights advocate Ambiga Sreenevasan, so stay tuned to consider this. Hi, thank you so much for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Lawyer and human rights advocate Datuk Ambiga Sreenevasan joins us on the show now. Ambiga, thank you for being on the show tonight. I want to begin our conversation looking at your call for the incoming Prime Minister to establish a unity government, one that comprises representatives from all political parties, from both sides of the divide. I'm just wondering, Ambiga, what incentives are there for Ismail Sabri to reach across the aisle?
Well, for me, when you have a majority that is not substantial, which is unfortunately the case here again, then if you cannot, as Prime Minister, bring more people in, then it is worthwhile considering a unity government. And the whole point about unity government, of course, in its purest form, is that it is a coalition of all the parties, and it is basically established in times of crisis. And I honestly feel we are in that crisis. We're suffering a triple whammy. We have COVID, we have economy, and of course we have the third element, which is political uncertainty and political toxicity, actually. So I think I have always, and if you recall when I was on your show, I think a couple of years ago, I also mooted a unity government because I feel stability is what is key. So why would it benefit a Prime Minister to consider a unity government? He would strengthen his position considerably if he does. Now, of course, we have to give this Prime Minister a chance now to see whether he can, establish government and his cabinet, etc., and strengthen his position. But you cannot take unity government off the table as long as the majority is a slim majority. That's my view. Yeah.
Ambiga, I wonder if your argument really pivoted on the idea, at least initially, that Ismail Sabri did not have the numbers because some of the components that parties or coalitions, did not give him unconditional support. I think the reference was to item 4.6 in the letter from the palace that the MPs declare a clear, unambiguous, and unconditional confidence in their candidate. But has that argument been superseded by now?
It has been superseded because the King has accepted the statutory declarations. Yes, that to me caused some uncertainty. And if you look at what's happened in a report today, that UMNO was not very happy with those conditions, as it were. So it's that kind of thing that we want to be wary of and be careful of. And you need a strong Prime Minister, actually, to bring everyone to heel and to make sure that this is a stable government. So, yes, that is one of the things that drove me to consider, to bring up the issue of unity government.
But Ambiga, let's just say, so Perikatan has stated this conditional support, right? What, in the event Ismail Sabri puts together a cabinet that does comprise individuals with criminal charges, could that mean in a test of his legitimacy in a vote of confidence, could we see him fail that test?
Well, this is the problem. You see, the way in which their conditions were worded is fairly wide. And of course, they are good conditions, don't get me wrong. You want people of integrity, et cetera, to be there. But who decides when that is breached? And if that is breached, does it mean PN will pull out their support? That is the problem with putting down conditions like that. But as I say, don't get me wrong, they're good conditions. And that's why I felt that, that really we have to wait and see how all of this shakes out, because I'm not sure whether they will, in fact, take a step if, in fact, those conditions are not fulfilled. And how do you define whether it's fulfilled? Who defines that? Who decides that? Yeah,
right.
that's the
I think Right. I mean, throughout the week, there has been some perhaps misplaced expectation that the palace would act in a way that was much more interventionist, considering the kinds of concerns that the palace itself had expressed about the need for a lowering of, the politicking and the need to focus on the pandemic. And I think the concern that everybody has about pandemic management. Do you think that the monarchs could have, or the monarch could have acted in any way other than what he did following the 114 vote?
I don't think so. I think in a constitutional monarchy, there are obviously red lines that they cannot cross, and they didn't. To be fair, they kept scrupulously within the confines of their authority as constitutional monarchs. What they did do was give advice, which they are entitled to do, which obviously was taken in some instances and not in others. So I think that's all the monarchy can do. It's now over to, of course, they decided going the SD route. Now it is determined that Ismail Sabri is the Prime Minister. We are, of course, anticipating that in September he will go and test his confidence in Parliament. Because don't forget, when Muhyiddin suspended Parliament, etc., one of the most vociferous voices were from UMNO. Lawyers like Azalina spoke very eloquently about the importance of Parliament. So I'm hoping they will uphold that and that there will be a vote of confidence in Parliament. And then, obviously, then things can move from there. But can I just add one thing about, you asked me about the unity government. I just want to say this. The unity government is something that should be there on the table because we've seen what's happened in the past when the majorities don't become bigger, okay? So it is something to me that must never be off the table. But at this point, what I would like to see from this Prime Minister actually is to take steps to reach across the aisle. And one of the things he can do immediately is to appoint, and I'm going to name names here, Dr. Zul back as Minister of Health, and I hope he will accept, to deal with the pandemic. That is the issue that is bothering the people the most. And I think once you bring in really competent people to deal with that and to deal with the issue of the economy, it will make people feel better. Let me tell you, people feel terrible right now. And I think we really have to, this government has to work for the people, not for themselves.
Can I ask you to elaborate very quickly on that? Because, incoming prime ministers tend to enjoy a honeymoon period. But I'm wondering about whether there will be one for Ismail Sabri, simply because a lot of the crises, as you also mentioned earlier, a lot of the crises that we face right now, he's had a hand in it. It's been exacerbated during his previous leadership role. What specifically are the challenges, the headwinds that you see him needing to tackle almost immediately, barring no honeymoon period for Ismail Sabri?
Yeah, my personal view is that there's no honeymoon, sorry. We're in a crisis situation. Expectations are high. The disappointment with the manner in which the pandemic was handled by this Prime Minister it was very, very palpable. And I think the anger and the fear of the people was very palpable. So I actually think he has an uphill task. But the way in which you address the people's fear and what they're going through is by bringing in the right people. And, what a wonderful move it would be if he brought in Dr. Zul. That is reaching across the aisle as well. And that will actually force the opposition to work with this government. Frankly, people are sick of the politicking. We didn't have to have the third whammy, which is the political instability that is caused by the politicians. They need to fix that. And I think this Prime Minister, that has to be uppermost in his mind. So rather than a unity government full-blown, he can bring in, you see, opposition has got so much talent. He can bring in some of those people, and his life will be easier, in my view, if he does that. Right. But you see, it requires statesmanship for that.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. That's human rights advocate Datuk Ambiga Sreenevasan. Thank you for being on the show. Now, that's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely weekend, folks. Good night.